Great. All right. Well, greetings, everybody. This is the Border Migration Justice Meeting for May 26th of 2024. I'm your host, Adrian Bernal, aka El Maestro, aka Adrian Bernal, for those of you who do not speak Espanol. But I know you're interested in knowing what's happening with the border and migration issues. So I am putting this together for you. I hope you will enjoy it. Today's topics will be agriculture, because there's been a number of deaths that have happened to agricultural workers. We'll also talk about some laws that affect migrants and a particular case in New York, the state of New York, that involves growers. Then we'll talk about voting and the accusations that immigrants are going to be voting in the next elections. And you hear a lot about that from our friends both on the Democratic and the Republican Party. We'll also talk about the laws that have been passed in places like Georgia and Arizona, Georgia HB 1105, and in Arizona 2060. So, and also we'll wrap up with some good news, fighting back, and what the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, or GLAR, is doing here in Atlanta. So, with that, we'll get started. Agriculture, you may have heard that there was a number of workers that were killed recently. A couple of weeks ago, a bus carrying agricultural workers was hit by a pickup truck near Ocala, Florida. It killed 8 people, 8 workers, and injured 45 others. The driver of the vehicle that struck the bus is an American, and he is being charged with the 8 homicides. He was also under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and he is a long time, he has a long record of substance abuse and traffic violations. In Idaho, 6 farm workers were killed and 9 were injured when a pickup truck hit a van carrying workers. Now, this is interesting because we hear a lot on mainstream media about how illegal immigrants are killing folks, and it's just not true. We'll get into that some more in a little bit, but this was an American that did it. So anytime a person that's undocumented causes an accident, it's those immigrants, they're killing people. We have to deport them all. But this is a case where we see that it was actually an American that was under the influence. And in both of these cases, the workers had H-2A visas, so they could legally work in agriculture. And that's important. That's a visa that they get so workers can come and pick our food for us. Now, another interesting thing, we'll move on to laws. Just last month, the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, he signed into law a bill that would prevent counties from having water break protection for their workers. This is unbelievable. And this all stemmed because Miami-Dade County officials had passed or are about to pass a law that said that people should be given water breaks when it was very hot outside. Now, each year, about 34 people die from heat-related causes. 2 million workers are expected to be affected by the legislature in Florida, where parts of the state experienced record-breaking heat last year and probably this year as well. Under this legislation, cities and counties will be prohibited from setting workplace standards that require drinking water, cooling measures, and recovery periods for after grueling work in hot weather. Now, requiring companies to facilitate emergency responses or to post or distribute materials informing workers about staying safe in sweltering heat would also be prohibited. This is incredible that they're passing laws to such a degree, and incredible thing about this is that DeSantis's law that he signed will cover all the counties in Florida. And that's what they wanted. They didn't want one county to mandate breaks. Then we'll see in our next story. This is something that the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, he signed a similar law last year. Now, this is after Austin, Texas passed a law in 2010 that required rest and water breaks on construction sites of at least 10 minutes every 4 hours. All right, keep that number in mind, 10 minutes every 4 hours. And last year or that year, the heat killed 13 people in Texas in 1 week. I'm from Texas, I'm from San Antonio, and it usually gets to be about 113, right about there. And it's a dry heat, so it's not that bad, but that means you don't feel it. And especially because construction work is work that's done outside, these workers are more vulnerable to stress heat because they're working, they're outdoors, the sun is beating on them, and they're doing physical labor. And more than 40% of all outdoor workers in the US are Black or Hispanic. And despite that, we make up 32% of the population. All right, so 40% of all outdoor work is done by Hispanics or Blacks, and but we're 32% of the population. Regulations to protect outdoor workers from extreme heat only exist in 6 states: California, Colorado, Maryland, Nevada, Oregon, and Washington. So, and there is no federal law that guarantees water breaks or rest or shade. But in 2021, the Biden administration ordered Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also known as OSHA, to produce heat safety standards. And these standards, well, we're still waiting for them. A 2021 investigation by NPR and Columbia Journalism Investigations found that nearly 400 workers have died of environmental heat exposure in the previous decade. So now we're going to go on to this New York grower. In September of last year, United Farm Workers shared a video of abuse and intimidation at Waffler Farms. Hundreds of thousands of people watched this video, and thousands of people took action and called the New York Department of Labor to intervene immediately, but they didn't. Now it appears work leaders are being retaliated against. After UFW posted the video on social media, the workers who were suspected of filming it said they began receiving extra attention, quote unquote, and scrutiny on the job. In addition, throughout the 2023 season, workers expressed concern over issues around wage theft, occupational health and safety, and general issues with disrespect and verbal abuse. Typically in early spring, Waffler begins recalling their H-2A workers. This year, some of those workers were not getting called because they were suspected of being active union supporters. And so the company's lawyers have refused to say why these people haven't been recalled. And this is creating a chilling environment for other workers as they fear retaliation. The New York Department of Labor should immediately investigate this acts, and they should require Waffler to recall the workers right away and give them back pay for the time that they missed. Waffler should respect New York state laws and stop intimidating and retaliating against workers who have been outspoken about labor violations. And they must address the issue of alleged wage theft, safety, and abusive managers. Okay, moving on now to voting. We hear a lot about how migrants are coming across the border and they're going to start voting immediately. There was a great cartoon I saw. It had people crossing the border, and there was a booth that said register to vote here. And that's what they're pushing. So On the 11th of April, President Trump and House Speaker Mike Johnson pitched new legislation to crack down on non-citizen voting, despite the fact that the practice is already illegal and occurs rarely. Johnson said House Republicans would introduce a bill to require documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote. Speaking at Mar-a-Lago next to Trump, he seeks to fend off threats from his right flank. This is, of course, Speaker Johnson. But according to the Brennan Center, every legitimate study ever done on the question shows that voting by non-citizens in state and federal elections is vanishingly rare. That includes the Brennan Center's own study of 42 jurisdictions in the 2016 general election. They said, we found that election officials in those places who oversaw the tabulation of 23.5 million votes referred only an estimated 30 incidents of suspected non-citizen voting for further investigation or prosecution. In other words, non-citizen votes accounted for just 0.0001% of the votes cast. And the Cato Institute will also tell you that non-citizens don't illegally vote in detectable numbers. Now, again, those numbers are out of 23.5 million votes, only 30, okay, were the ones that were suspected of being non-citizen voting. Now, here's the case of Crystal Mason. You may have heard about that name. The Texas Appeals Court recently overturned Mason's 5-year prison sentence for casting a provisional ballot in the 2016 election while on supervised release for federal tax evasion. Now, Crystal Mason is an African American. She is an American, so she wasn't doing this. She's not undocumented. And her crime, quote unquote, that got her 5 years in prison was that she was under supervised release. She was on parole for tax evasion. Okay. So the Tarrant County District Attorney, Phil Sorrells, wants Crystal Mason's illegal voting conviction reinstated, his office announced last Thursday. Mason, a Tarrant County resident, was acquitted of an illegal voting charge last month. Sorrell's office is now asking the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals to overturn the ruling that cleared her. Mason was convicted of illegal voting in March of 2018 and sentenced to 5 years in prison for casting a provisional ballot while she was on supervised federal tax evasion. This office will protect the ballot box from fraudsters who think our laws don't apply to them, said Sorrell, the DA. All right, so moving on now to this whole notion of these laws that are being passed in different states. As the U.S. election goes into its final phase, more and more candidates are taking the position that undocumented workers should be deported. If you follow that logic, that would mean less workers to do dangerous construction jobs, less workers to work in the agricultural industry, and less workers to do unpopular jobs like hotel housekeeping, etc. Now, in Arizona, human rights defenders oppose a new legislative initiative that would give voters the ability to directly vote on an anti-immigrant law that will grant local authorities the power to arrest undocumented migrants. May 22nd, Arizona state senators voted to advance HCR 2060, an extreme, unconstitutional, and anti-immigrant ballot referral that would apply new state penalties to violations of federal immigration law. It will next be considered by the House. So, if passed in both houses and then approved by the voters, HCR 2060 would pose serious threats to migrants and citizens alike. The proposed law has no geographic limits or enforcement actions, age restrictions, or exemptions for sensitive locations like schools, hospitals, or places of worship. Furthermore, the proposal would grant civil immunity to local government officials and law enforcement for damages resulting from actions, including unlawful and unconstitutional actions taken during enforcement of the proposed law. So that means that the law enforcement officials get carte blanche to do whatever they want when they're out there arresting people of color, and this is very similar to Arizona's infamous Show Me Your Papers law, or SB 1070. Now, moving on to Georgia, we have HB 1105, which would mandate local law enforcement agencies to participate in federal programs like 287G, a program that only 4 of Georgia's 159 counties currently participate in, and it would force local law enforcement officials to interpret and enforce federal immigration laws, or else lose state funding and even face prosecution. HB 1105 also requires jails to publish quarterly reports publicly detailing the immigration status and crimes of inmates who are not U.S. citizens. However, these reports, by limiting their focus to inmates who are not citizens, will distort the reality, which is that immigrants do not commit crimes at a higher rate than U.S. citizens. To perpetuate harmful stereotypes about Latinos and immigrants in our state would embolden those with hate in their hearts to commit violent acts against our community, as we've seen in El Paso, Pittsburgh, and Buffalo. So HB 1105 will drive a wedge between local law enforcement and the communities that they serve, which of course is a misnomer because the police are not there to serve the communities. They are there to serve the powers that be. Now, for the good news, there's an organization in Georgia called GLAR, which is the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights, and they have organized a march from City Hall all the way to ICE, the custom enforcement offices of ICE, Immigration and Custom Enforcement. And that's going to be happening Thursday, May 30th from 3:30 to 5:30. So there will be pro-immigrant organizations from across the country and local activists who are coming to Atlanta, where I'm from, here at the Atlanta local chapter. And they'll be marching from City Hall to the ICE offices. And they will be protesting the repression of activism by state police and the growing anti-immigrant sentiment that has reached a dangerous point within the electoral discourse, and demanding an immediate and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. We're sounding the alarm on Governor Kemp's signing of Bill 1105 that gives local authorities the power to detain the immigrant community as if they were federal agents. Mm-hmm. Mayor Andre Dickens supports the construction of a huge police training center known as Cop City, and President Biden continues to support of right-wing agendas and anti-immigrant policies. And finally, on Saturday, June 1st, at 11 a.m., GLAR will be going to Iglesia Cristiana Monte de Sion for an important community discussion on HB 1105. They will talk about the implications of this bill and share strategies for community defense for the safety and awareness of the inhabitants and those who they love. An important opportunity for everyone to ask questions, voice concerns, and come together to strengthen their community. And this is something that will be happening in north of Georgia. So the GLAR is going out and reaching to all of these places um, that so that people know. In Atlanta, in Georgia, we have this huge immigration. Um, a lot of immigrant people. Some of them work up north at in Hall County where they raise chickens, they process chickens. We have a lot of that. We also have a lot of carpet factories, and that's what's going on. So we do have, and then of course we have a lot of people that pick Vidalia onions and all of those things. So this is a very important law because the people will be scared of calling the police in case something were to happen out of fear of being deported.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all we have. If you have any questions, I'm open for questions.
I don't have questions really. I'm just surprised by the slow pace of laws because in the early 2000s, I lived in Chatham County, North Carolina, which was just becoming a place where Latino families, would settle. And by the time I left at around 2004, they were 16% of the population. And that's a pretty big, I mean, not huge, but it was almost on par with the population of Black folks in the county. Um, and there was just a really strange cultural shift that happened. I was in my work, I was trying to get police not to do 287G. And we got, we got it banned in places like Durham and Greensboro and Asheville. We didn't in Charlotte, but there were other counties, smaller counties that we did. But it's just, I would think that nearly 20 years after that, we wouldn't still be here. And that's really, we wouldn't
Right.
still be fighting 287G to make a local sheriff's department use its resources to do the Fed's work. It's not in their job description. So, it's a waste, it's bad, it's physically bad. That was our best argument.
Yeah.
But it's also unjust. There's a lot bad about it.
Right.
They would do sweeps, 287. They were doing that, checking everybody. It's bad. It's very bad. Well, I'm going to stop your recording. That was a great presentation.
Thanks, everybody.
And a lot of good information.
Yeah,
Okay,
thanks. We'll see you all back on the 23rd of next month.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
See ya.